Good afternoon, Com 1200. Dr. Mueller here today. It's a little after 3 p.m. on a Thursday. Beautiful weather in the high country. I hope it's the same where you are. It's almost maybe a last great reprieve before the late fall and early winter weather will set in. I wanted to come to you today, sort of a transition through a bunch of great work in the course. Sort of enjoy this second part because, we go through Postman, and many of you have commented how you like that process, really learning about, in context, what was the first sort of significance or who was calling out what would become media manipulation. What had happened to true news reporting and what was shifting. And of course, much of Postman's work is done regarding television. And how can that, again, I always bring it back to, in conclusion, what's the practical application today? So I wanted to talk through a little bit of this. I think I will, just so you know, also, I probably share an excerpt from this lecture on my personal YouTube channel because I do like to promote the program and also promote you as wonderfully proficient students as you go through this, reading, comprehension, writing, speaking, communication experience. Okay. So, we got through Postman, really got to that first essay in the course, and then we became prepared to move into the second half of the course. And that's really all independent readings. And what I enjoy as an educator is the opportunity to choose what we read, what we feature. Now, again, there's always somewhat of a standardization in this course across several different professors, how we teach the course. But there's also that content about, how do we really think through communication? And in this part, most of the readings in this second half of the course are readings I have designed or devised. And I would just like to cover a little bit of that with you today. How did you like, of course, we came through metaphor, and in my mind, that whole piece and just understanding the power of metaphor and seeing that big reveal in our own lives, and then becoming more alert and aware of when metaphor is in use in ourselves and others, it demonstrates that metaphor can clearly help us take one thing and it immediately reflects on another, right? The meaning of another. But it also many times travels with a bias, right? So how we see things, big example is, how often we use war metaphor. I think I'll take a stab at that project tomorrow, right? And so we've done that. And once we become aware, we go, well, isn't that rather, violent or possibly conflicted in how we might really want to communicate. Okay, so great work, Lakoff and Johnson, on metaphor. And then just got done with that piece with Zitkala Sa. Also Redbird, human rights activist for indigenous peoples in, I believe a lot of her writings were in the early 1900s up through the 1930s. Couple things there, how interesting, we talk in the course about forced assimilation, she was really taken and put into, the white man's world. And that was, at that point, was meant to be total assimilation. You were supposed to be divorced from your indigenous customs and then, of course, assimilated into the American white way of life. And it's interesting with Redbird, she had every opportunity in the white world, but she continued to transition back into the rights and activism in her indigenous tribe. And I find that interesting because she was talented and she had a lot of opportunities in music and education, but she felt that she still had to stand up for the plight of her tribe and other indigenous natives. Now, we learned so much over time about, I think maybe it feels like there was this one cowboys and Indians transitional thing in the 1800s, and then there was a big switching over. But we can see here well into the better part of the 1900s what was still happening. Okay. You did a good job on that. I think a lot of you liked it. I always see the passion in writing when we work with the Zetkala Sa Redbird piece. Okay, so that went through, we worked on that. I had a video out on that going into that assignment. And then now we're coming in on Tuesday, Margaret Chase Smith. Isn't that interesting? I hope you can really see the then and now comparisons from Margaret Chase Smith. What was happening in that era? Who was Joseph McCarthy, right? Talk about fear and fear mongering and the fear of being canceled. This was a true cancel culture in the 1950s, I believe. I had to stop for a drink of water late in the day. I'm losing my voice a little bit, but by the way, let me back up one point. Zetkala Sa, think about being an activist before you had any digital footprint. Can you imagine? It was really hard to get any reach, right? You might be featured in a newspaper article or a magazine, and you might have a reach of a couple thousand people, right? So you had a lot to say, and it was maybe really important, but you really had a difficult time getting an alternative point of view into the general public. Now, there's good and bad to all of that, but think about today, anybody with a smartphone or a keyboard and a laptop can have a big voice very quickly. Social media platforms and others, right? We're all immediately digitally empowered to have our POV point of view. Zetkala Sa and others in those earlier eras, again, moving through, probably a pretty geographically regional and slow moving print culture, right? Not that much reach. So in those days, people, they worked hard. They were working and trying to do more with a lot less opportunity in media reach. Okay. Margaret Chase Smith, yes, June 1950, start of the 1950s, right? Think of context. What's going on? Well, we're not that far out of the World War II, right? 1945. So they're just a few years past World War II. What comes out of this so fast? Again, Joseph McCarthy, the McCarthy era, right? The Red Scare. Being labeled a communist was difficult. And here's my point. So many times this is just sort of like a moment or a passing, and we talk about things like McCarthy and the Red Scare. Lives were ruined. It's no different than in much of what happens with cancel culture today. Now, cancel culture, I would argue, is waning somewhat through the digital social media sense. But in the day of Margaret Chase Smith and McCarthyism, being labeled communist, especially, well, not especially, but partially in quite a bit in the Hollywood setting, many careers were ruined forever because you were labeled a communist, right? If some of you have ever seen the recent movie Oppenheimer, if you have not, I would suggest it. There is a very deep thread throughout that movie talking about his association with early communist parties and communist movements in the United States. And to just see the nuance of being threatened or associated with that line of thinking or group of people. So a lot of that was going on, and this is a pretty short speech. And I ask you to write about this for that next assignment coming in on Tuesday. But Margaret Chase Smith, and again, think about what she is proposing here in government, United States politics in 1950, and then look at the presidential election we just completed. This is a wonderful, once again, then and now. And what I like about this course is being able to choose some of the readings that I believe are important for you. We get to take a little bit of look at history in a media context, thinking through communication. Here was a communication, group communication, right? Senate floor, making a speech, short but powerful. And in that, we think about what was expressed and how does it reflect on today. And the lesson in most of it is, one, this is something you may not have heard of or may not have read about Margaret Chase Smith. History is fleeting now more than ever, We seem to retain things now it only seems minutes or days. rather than years. I was thinking back the other day, the whole context of education would maybe be where the school gave you 6 or 8 textbooks for the school year. That was the universe of knowledge, 6 or 8 textbooks. Well, now our universe of knowledge is impossible to comprehend or keep up with, right? We have to make choices on what we study and what we try to understand. So here's a little metaphorical snapshot in time of Margaret Chase Smith. And again, think of this, the dynamic of a woman senator, a woman in politics, a woman who was actually at the time and within those years viable as a presidential candidate in 1950. So what I try so hard to do with you is do the extra work, understand the characters, and as you heard it from me too many times, what are the arguments she makes? What is she arguing for? What does she want to happen? Margaret Chase Smith. Okay. This assignment, again, a little different, but what I wanted you to do is set it up as you would make it public facing. And again, this is optional, but I would suggest LinkedIn and other. And by the way, here's a point. I want to make sure everybody watches these videos. Here's a point. I want you to, in that, fabricated or mock-up media post, right? We're mocking up a media post on this reading, that you demonstrate, you open the post by introducing who you are, what you're doing, and what course you're in, and what institution you're at. Okay, set it up, because I believe, if you're going to talk about academic matters as a student emerging as a new social leader, it's best to just clarify that. I'm a student learning. I'm a student in this course. We're reading this type of readings. We just finished reading about Margaret Chase Smith on the Senate floor in 1950. So I want to see in this assignment, again, here it is in this video, supplementary information to what I will expect in that assignment, is that you identify yourself and set the context and frame who you are, the class, the institution, then go into the piece. I think this also promotes yourself in learning, and I've also learned this. It's very difficult for anyone to ever attack a student in the learning process. You're a student learning, you're a student reflecting on this piece of writing, this speech, okay? So please start with that, and then you write in the same type of clear, concise form that you would use in essay, but in this sense, you're writing for a social media post. I'd always personally suggest LinkedIn, because that's the career builder, and that is where you should have a good, solid stream of intelligent content, right? LinkedIn isn't just, here's my face, I think I'll upload my resume, put content in there, relevant, ongoing content to demonstrate the power and persuasion you are earning through your work in a course like Com 1200. Okay? So again, Margaret Chase Smith, social media oriented post for that assignment, bringing it in with an introduction of yourself and your context with Appalachian State University and your Com 1200 Thinking Through Communication course. Okay, get that in the intro as you open. All right, so we go through that, and then let me metaphorically walk you one step ahead yet to November 11-15 block, and there will be an assignment due Tuesday, November 19. Okay, that is Walter Lippmann. Now, we just don't have time in this course, or I don't try to make too many assignments at some point because we got to go into preparation for essay exam 2. But what I would say here is to consider the entire public opinion book. I posted in the week block, I give you a link to our university library ebook. The whole thing is important. There are times in this course I've used much more work out of Lippmann, but again, I keep trying to test and experiment and change the content of Thinking Through Communication. But read Lippmann, read more. Some of you I know are curious. You're going beyond the requirements in the course. Okay, so Walter Lippmann, Public Opinion, look for that ebook link. Now, I also include, in itself, the chapter Stereotypes as Defense, and we learn about Lippmann introducing stereotypes in our lives. Now, also, let me back up. Be sure you learn the context of Lippmann. Who was he? Who did he work with? What did he write about? Why does it matter? Why was he powerful? Why was he important? Okay, why is he a big name in the whole media thing? Set that context so you understand where this is coming from. But Lippmann is many times credited with much of the early work on defining and helping us understand the process of stereotype and the power it has. Okay, so for this, you're going to read just the stereotypes chapter, and then I have, again, another little mini essay. These are practices going toward that essay exam too, where I give you the same thing you saw before, where you'll write an intro. I put in that, I really put a lot of emphasis on the hook, the metaphorical hook you lead with. I want to see that you bring this in powerfully to engage the readers. What is it out of this? Such an important topic, okay? And then you bring it in, and then we're going to have, again, you'll bring in two arguments from Lippmann about what he believes are part of the structure and process of forming a stereotype. Okay, two. So the same thing, you've seen this before in a mini essay, short, concise introduction, introducing two arguments, supporting paragraphs, two of them, one for each of those arguments. Then I also suggest, please, required, bring in one specific example from the author to set explicit context for the argument in each of those two supporting paragraphs. Bring that to the reader. Let your readers see in context where Lippmann was building his thoughts and ideas. Okay, remember again, don't write about themes, write about specific arguments. What is the action he wants to occur? Okay, then conclusion. This is a big one and pretty easy to see. How do stereotypes affect our current political model through the media? That's how you conclude this. Bring in a modern media news report and showcase, metaphorically, I guess, showcase how stereotypes have affected us. And don't we know that to be true after we're just finishing up with this last presidential election? How denigrating some can be to the other. Okay, how denigrating. Because just by a certain political view, we become stereotyped with a multiple array of dimensional behaviors that we are said to immediately be ours. And I'm not going to call out them all because they're derogatory, right? But you're a blank, well then you're immediately accused of 5 or 10 different things. How has stereotype been developed? And in this case, if we look from then, look at some of Lippmann's examples. And by the way, what era is that? Note the time frame. When was he writing? Not too much different than Zit-Kala-Sa. Note his time. And then what about today? Okay. And I would argue, you tell me in your writing, is stereotype even more highly weaponized today than Lippmann ever thought it would be or intended to portray it as in his writing? Okay, that's it. Sort of what we've been going through, where we're at with Margaret Chase Smith, what we're heading into with Lippmann. Great stuff, great stuff. So you've got a couple assignments coming up due, then you'll hear back from me, and we'll be focused and featured on what you will see. I've had some questions from students already, but what you can expect in essay exam 2. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much. Com 1200. Bye-bye.